We are preparing this podcast series as part of the Women in Social Peace project. The main aim of this series is to benefit and inspire women from the experiences and stories of women mediators and peace builders from Turkey and the world.
In this series, as Dilara Gök, Dilan and Tunç Karaçay, we came together with valuable women mediators and peace builders.
We will be pleased to bring their voices together with you.
Hi everyone, I am Dilan.
I am Tunç Karaçay.
We are preparing this podcast series as part of the Women in Social Peace project. The main aim of this series is to benefit and inspire from the experiences and stories of women mediators and women working in the field of the peace building from Turkey and the world. Additionally, we will make these stories accessible in different languages. In today's program, we have a valuable guest working in this field, Andromachi Sophocleous. Welcome, Yasu Andromachi. Before giving the floor to you, I would like to briefly talk about you. Andromachi is a political theory graduate and political analyst. Besides being one of the founders of Unite Cyprus Now movement, she has been active in the Cyprus civil society for years, working on projects seeking to generate discussion and critical thinking among locals about the country's complex political problem. She is also co-producing Nicosia Uncut podcast at Island Talks, a trilingual podcast station of Cyprus. We are the followers of this podcast program as well, and we hope that today we will make another great podcast with you.
And thank you, Dilan, for your nice introduction. Dear Andromachi, we have some question about your experiences. But before this question, we would like to briefly explain the situation in Cyprus for our listeners. Cyprus gained its independence in 1960. However, there were conflicts both at international and the social level. With the Cyprus operation in 1974, the island was actually divided into the two regions. Within the process, the conflict did not de-escalate, unfortunately. In the meantime, some steps have been taken for a solution, but we can say that these steps were generally at the state level. In fact, Kofi Annan, who is Secretary General of United Nations and well known by Turkish people, also worked as mediator in this process. Despite all the developments, we see that there is no sustainable solution for both societies. In this regard, we would like to benefit from your experiences in order to understand the process in terms of civil society and gender dimension.
First of all, let me just say thank you for having me at the podcast. It's a great honor, and it is I'm very happy to be able to be speaking to a Turkish audience about the things that are currently happening in Cyprus.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, actually, we are so happy to guest you in here, Andromachi, and thank you, Tunç, for your nice summarize about background of the Cyprus issue. Maybe at this point we can start our conversation. And firstly, we would like to start with the Unite Cyprus Now movement, Andromachi. Can you tell just a little about Unite Cyprus Now movement? What kind of peace did this movement demand for us?
So yes, the Unite Cyprus Now movement is a movement that began in 2017. It was organically developed through social media, in fact, and it was a call for Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots to go out in the streets and protest the lack of development in the then negotiation process. That was back in May 2017. And it indeed happened. I mean, we managed to get Cypriots from all over the island to gather in the buffer zone and to be there every single day demanding a solution to the Cyprus problem according to the United Nations resolutions that are calling for a bi-zonal, bi-communal federation. So it was a very important moment for us. And it was the first time that a delegation of Cypriots, in fact, traveled to to Switzerland, to Crans-Montana, where the negotiations were taking place. This, in fact, happened in July, at the end of June 2017. So that was the first time that Cypriots were actually there. We were not in the building, but we were outside, and we were there through a symbolic move to show our leaders that Cypriots want a solution. Because it is very important for our audience to understand that since the 60s, when the negotiations started between Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots for a political solution to the problem on the island, the negotiations have rested at a leader-led level. And we are talking about literally more than 50 years of discussions that have been taking place, and they've been taking place between two leaders, one Greek Cypriot and one Turkish Cypriot, who have always been men, while civil society is mostly disregarded in this process, despite the numerous calls by the United Nations. So we are at this stage in which so many years have passed. We keep failing because the negotiations evidently keep failing, as there is no solution to the problem. But at the same time, we never look at changing the paradigm. We never look at changing how we try to go about with these negotiations. And as Unite Cyprus Now, we many times called for a greater participation of Cypriots in the negotiation process, for a greater participation, especially of women and youth, that are the people that are mostly ignored in this process. However, we see absolutely no move from this. Even today, all the talk happens at the leader-led level. And this leaves the people of the island aside. And you need to bear in mind that the majority of Cypriots do not even know or understand what the political solution discussed is. And this is because the negotiations take place at such a secluded sort of setting. So as Unite Cyprus Now, we were calling for a solution to the problem, and at the same time, we were demanding for these changes in the way the negotiations were being conducted. And we were seeking for greater transparency, because when you are negotiating for the peace in one country, when you're trying to put a conflict aside, you cannot do it disregarding the people of the island. A political solution will only go as far as the people of the island can support it. And unless the people are prepared and in full awareness of what the solution being discussed is, then there is no way that we can hope for peace. And we in Unite Cyprus Now made sure to clarify this, to make it. We were talking about creating the culture of peace on the island, even while we are negotiating for a solution. And I must also say about Unite Cyprus Now, the movement, that it is in fact mostly leader-led. We have very key, obviously, men that are members, but the people that currently work for the movement, work as in voluntarily give their time for the movement, are mostly women, in fact.
Yeah, it's really important to underline for this. It is really important to stand like this kind of demand. Can you just explain or give a little more detail for us? How was the reaction and participation of the both sides of the island to this movement?
Okay, so it is very important for our audience and for everyone, in fact, to understand that for a problem that has been pending for so long between two communities that have not lived under the same roof since the 60s, a lot of myths have been created in both communities about the other. Greek Cypriots are always defined in respect to the other, who is the Turkish Cypriot, or Turkey, in fact, many times, and the same vice versa. So you've got Turkish Cypriots being defined by what the other is. So this animosity has been going on for many years, and most people that discuss the Cyprus problem, even in the political setting, especially in the Greek Cypriot society, they do it through the prism of nationalism, through the prism of hatred, especially towards Turkey, that is seen as the root of all evil in Cyprus for the Greek Cypriots. And when a movement emerges that suddenly tries to change the language, we tried to change the rhetoric. As Unite Cyprus Now, we tried to use the rhetoric of understanding, of empathy, of trying to understand each other. And that was a message that we were putting forward in all our public interventions. We were always guided by our values, by the values that determine the vision and mission of the movement. For us, we managed to fully disregard the community from which one from where one emerges, and this is how we conducted our political stance in public, and that was not well received, especially in the Greek Cypriot society. That was mostly used to people talking in a negative way about the other. Reconciliatory talk, a more positive talk about the people with whom we are supposedly negotiating for a solution, was never the dominant thing in Cyprus. And when you had a movement that was using this rhetoric in public, and at the same time a movement that managed to gain a lot of interest by the international media, that reflected badly in some Greek Cypriot media, especially. And that is why we were being targeted. And I'm sure because we are all working in conflict transformation, people that call for peace are often disregarded as traitors within their own communities, and this is something that we also experienced. In fact, we often say that we think that one of our greatest accomplishments has been the fact that both the Greek Cypriot and the Turkish Cypriot nationalists have targeted us, and they have described us as as traitors of our respective communities, and they have described us as either serving the interests of Turkey or serving the interest of Greece, uh, depending on who is the one who criticizes us. So you understand that that was startling at first, because we received a lot of attacks. There were people going on the media and saying proper lies about us. But at the same time, there was a lot of positive response as well by people from all across the island. And I must say that especially the Turkish Cypriot community embraced the Unite Cyprus movement very fondly, and without this distrust that the Greek Cypriot public had towards us. Having said that, of course, a lot of Greek Cypriots joined our cause. This has I need to make it clear that we are a movement, that we are a multi-communal movement. We've got Greek Cypriots, Turkish Cypriots, Armenians, Latins, Maronites. We've got Kurds, even people from Turkey that live in the north of the island are supporting us, and even Greek nationals in the south. So we have had a lot of support by a lot of people on the ground, but of course we also received a lot of attacks. And because the dominant faces that emerged from the movement were women, they were especially the most vulnerable ones to attack, because I'm sure you also know this. When women come forward, there are a dozen more things to accuse them of than when men come forward. So when women come forward, they get all the attacks. And for myself, like, there is a very popular cartoonist in the most in a very powerful newspaper in Cyprus that basically represents the Greek Cypriot mainstream, and that cartoonist always used to portray Unite Cyprus Now with a woman with the sort of hair that I have, which is curly and and with a lot of volume, and they were properly making fun of us. And we received a lot of attacks on social media as well, uh, some to the extent of being proper threats. But from a point and on, you come and say that you understand that if our communities were ready to hear what we had to say, then we wouldn't have had to emerge and we wouldn't have had to be created. And therefore, we understood that this was something that we had to take it upon our shoulders. And I must stress here that Unite Cyprus Now was by no means the first movement to propose and to call for peace on the island. There were people before us, in even more difficult times, even at times when the two communities could not even meet before the crossing points were opened, which happened in 2003, there were people that paved the way for what we were. And it is important to stress that much more brave people came before us, people that maybe they were not receiving the attacks that we were receiving on social media, etc., but they were receiving an everyday sort of attacks on the ground as well. So there was a lot of work by the so many people that have worked for reconciliation before Unite Cyprus Now emerged. And what Unite Cyprus Now did was basically bridge this. We are kind of the younger generation that is fighting for peace on the island, and we are doing it with different means as well, because we used social media as well a lot in our struggle, and that allowed us to reach even more people on the island.
Thank you, Andromachi. As you mentioned in the conflict resolution and reconciliation, it is really important to bottom up and young perspective, I think, especially when we are talking about today. Maybe we can say that if you want to read more about United Cyprus Now, you may see the website of this movement. In this way, our listener may have an opportunity to know you better. As you underlined, this conflict is still going on, and so when you evaluate all negotiations process in Cyprus, you mentioned a little bit, but maybe we can, to give more detail. What would you like to say about women participation and what kind of method they use, and how do you think they gained from this process?
No, I think it is important to clarify and make it absolutely clear that women are absent from the negotiations of the Cyprus problem. This is not an exaggeration, it is true. As I explained, the negotiations take at the leader-led level, which means that it's literally the leaders of the two communities that are negotiating under the UN auspices. Each leader has their own team of negotiators. In both communities, the leaders have always been men, and at the same time in both communities the members of the negotiating teams have always been in their great majority men as well. So it is no exaggeration to say that women are absent from these negotiations. Women's perspective is are absent from these negotiations. And just like I mentioned that Unite Cyprus Now movement is mostly a female-led movement, it is important to mention that a lot of the other organizations in Cyprus that are also working for reconciliation, for rapprochement, for the solution of the Cyprus problem, they also have a lot of female participation, and therefore someone has to answer why this wide interest of women at the civil society level in the Cyprus problem and the peace negotiations is not reflected in a greater percentage of participation in the negotiating teams and in the negotiations themselves. Someone has to answer about this. The United Nations in the past 20 years, they have been very keen to be stressing the need for women participation in peace processes. And and indeed, the United Nations peacekeeping force in Cyprus is always very keen to stress this in all the reports of the United Nations Secretary General. But at the same time, we see no change. I remember that after the 2017 negotiations collapsed, there was this team from the United Nations that came to Cyprus, and they were evaluating where the negotiations went wrong, trying to see what they can change in the process. Something that many of their interlocutors told them was that women need to be much more actively engaged in the process. But we saw no change. And even today, that there are discussions about negotiations, so of course, this is very difficult at the moment, but even in the discussions, women are absent. So somebody needs to take the political initiative in this and understand that you are not trying to build a solution plan that will be accepted by people if you ignore the people in this process. You cannot be doing this. On the one hand, you've got the need to include the perspective of at least half of your population, that is women. So you need to include their perspective in what is being discussed, because survey after survey in the country has proved that both Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot women are motivated by different concerns than the Cypriot men. So this perspective is never taken into consideration. At the same time, we need to understand, and this is where the need for the participation of youth is also very important, because it's not only women, but it's also the younger generation that also needs to be included in this process. We need to understand that, as I said before, any solution plan can only be supported as long as the people on the island are willing to support it. As long as you do not prepare the people, you do not make the people understand that what is being discussed concerns their future and they need to be part of these discussions, then how can you hope for these people to come and support any conclusion that you reach? So it is kind of counterintuitive if you think about it, what everyone involved is doing by ignoring the vast majority of the population from the negotiations and by leaving the female perspective as well outside the whole process.
Andromachi, your comments and ideas are very important actually to understand the process in social level. And you said very significant things to underline the gender dimension of the issue. Thank you so much. But before closing the nice conversation, we would like to ask about the current situation of the Republic of Cyprus. How does the government approach the issue in terms of social participation and peace building perspective?
No, the situation is very, very disappointing. And sadly, despite the numerous calls by the civil society, but as well as by the United Nations itself, for both sides, in fact, to encourage and to work on civil participation, to work even on changing the educational material at schools in the country, because the only way to encourage people to be interested in the process and to be interested in the Cyprus problem is, first of all, to speak to the people about the problem, but speak to them in a way that shows that you are indeed that you indeed want a Cyprus problem solution. Because for all these years, we've been trying to solve a problem that was created by hatred and fanaticism, only by injecting even more hatred and fanaticism to our younger generation. No, never has anyone worked on promoting true peace, peace through the words, peace through actions, peace through allowing people to remember that even at our most difficult times on this island, there were Cypriots that were collaborating, there were Greek Cypriots helping their Turkish Cypriot compatriots and vice versa. But all these are never told, and all we hear about are the stories of horror and of hatred. And this needs to change. And sadly, no administration has ever shown any willingness to do this. I must stress that there was an attempt in the Turkish Cypriot community to do it at some point, but with the change in administration, it stopped, and the books that were more reconciliatory, they were removed. So unless you change your education, how can you hope to create a generation of people that will understand the problem and that will want to solve the problem with their compatriots? At the same time, I think it is also very important to stress that, sadly, because the Cyprus problem has been used by politicians for so many years as a way for the politicians to remain in relevance. So basically, all we talk about is the Cyprus problem, and we never get to talk about the other problems of people on the island. This has created this fatigue in people on the island, and especially a fatigue in the younger generation, a younger generation that has no memories of a common life of Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots under the same roof. And it is a younger generation that is sick and tired of hearing about the Cyprus problem that is being discussed always, and that it keeps coming up all the time. And this younger generation is more apathetic towards the whole process. And this is especially true of the Greek Cypriot community, again, I must stress. And so we need to understand that Cypriots, and that's something that civil society has to do. But I think that institutionally wise, it is mostly up to the leaders of the communities to do it. We need to understand that the Cyprus problem impacts and influences every single part of our daily life, regardless we understand it or not. And this is something that, as Unite Cyprus Now, we really try to work hard on. But unless the government decides to also put this forward as a message, then we cannot hope for much. And that's my concluding message, and my answer to this question is that governments need to show, and that the Republic of Cyprus government needs to show that it truly desires a solution, and it needs to show it through actions and not through words. And there are a lot to be done if you're truly interested in a solution and you have the power of the executive. There are so many things to be done, even when it comes to our relationship with the Turkish Cypriots and how the Turkish Cypriots are being perceived. The same, of course, goes for the Turkish Cypriot administration. However, I understand that the current Turkish Cypriot administration is so nationalistic and extremist that we cannot hope for much. However, the Republic of Cyprus government claims to desire a federation, and we have demand for it to act as a government that indeed desires a federation. And so, no, sadly, my evaluation of the current government's actions is very negative. And I believe that there are a lot that it could have done and it chooses not to.
Thank you very much for your comments about the current situation. And another question that came to our minds according to your explanation, Andromachi. As you know, our focus is gender and peace, and you have already mentioned this. What would you like to say about women's struggle in Cyprus, and how do women approach this struggle?
I think that on this in general, this rests on two things. On the one, it rests on understanding the place in time in which we are in. History and our lives, they are not created in a vacuum. We are there is of years of evolution and of conflict and of political discussions and everything. And I believe that it is important for women to understand that the struggle of our times is the struggle to assert ourselves as equals to men at every level. Equals as in we have the equal rights. We are not the same, but we should have equal rights. And I think that on the one hand, it is very important for women, of course, to understand this. And I'm referring to women because obviously I expect everyone to understand this, but because we are talking about how women are supposed to handle this struggle, I am referring to women mostly here. And I want to tell everyone that we need to understand that this is our struggle of this is the struggle of our times, and we need to assume our role of defending it at all levels. And once you understand that, and once you appreciate your role in this sort of social evolution and in this social course, um, from then on, I think you also learn to filter out what is keeping you down, or what is trying to disgrade you or to disregard you. um, I understand that it can be a difficult process because I went through it with all the women in the movement and myself as well. It can be very difficult. It can cause a lot of concern and upset in people's families. But again, because when one is motivated by the cause, one understands that it comes with a package, let's say. The moment you choose to come forward and say your opinion on something, and especially on something as conflicting as the Cyprus problem on the island, it is the moment that you know, or you should know, or in ultimately you will know that you will receive a lot of attacks. And I think it comes with how toxic and how toxic basically the Cyprus problem discussion is on the island. But again, I must stress, you understand our role in time, and this is our struggle for the days, and we need to assume it.
Andromachi, thank you again. Actually, it was very nice conversation. this issue is very important for us because many people claim that they know cybers, but indeed we have very limited connection with the society. That is why this conversation is so meaningful to think with the broad perspective, and we hope that there will be a sustainable solution for both societies, and women play an important role in this solution process. And thank you for such a nice conversation, and we are glad to talk with you in this program. So if you want to add something more, we can listen you. But first of all,
Çok teşekkürler. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to make this bridge with the people in Turkey that are working on similar issues like the ones that we are also working on. And it would be a pleasure to meet you at some point, either in Cyprus or Turkey or wherever. It's been a pleasure to meet all of you, and thank you very much for giving me the stage.
it's pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
First of all.
Efforistopoli.